Is there anything we can be doing to protect ourselves from the shade of the people who are the desperate opportunists, let's call them that?
This is CrisisCast 2020 with me, Toby Goodman, a podcast where I get timely wisdom from experts in life and business. These guests will answer my 5 questions, sharing wisdom and insights to help you and me get through this global shitstorm.
Today on CrisisCast 2020, having seen the collapse of the Eastern Bloc as a child in Bulgaria and moving to Atlanta in the USA, Christo Angelov has also lived through 9/11 and the financial crisis of 2008. The result? A man who exudes the level of calm many of us are aspiring to right now. What else? Well, I'll tell you. Christo's in the business of helping his clients protect their businesses through his work at FireBrand Security, specifically customer and employee data, intellectual property, supply chains and beyond. So I was happy to take his advice about how to identify an opportunistic scammer as we all spend even more time online. Enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with my friend Christo Angelov. Before we start the show, I have something for you if you identify as pod curious. It's perfect for you if you're an expert, consultant, or business owner. Maybe you're wondering if podcasting is worth the effort, especially now, or perhaps you've tried podcasting in the past but have been disappointed with the results. In this free guide, Podstar, I'll share the exact 7 steps we use to help publish over 2,000 podcasts each month. To get instant access, go to podcastnetworksolutions.com. Christo Angelov from FireBrand Security, somewhere in the USA, which we're going to find out exactly where. Welcome to CrisisCast 2020. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. Now, I know that you're in the States. Are you in Atlanta?
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia.
Cool, right. So you're in Atlanta, but you're not from Atlanta.
No, I'm not originally from Atlanta. Originally, I'm from Sofia, Bulgaria, and I moved to Athens, Georgia, which is a university town, 1992, when I was 10 years old.
How's your Bulgarian? Is it still...
My Bulgarian is still good, conversationally. It's strong. I can read and write decently, but obviously it erodes a little bit every single year.
So when it comes to your experience so far, this has been my opening question. I'm kind of wondering, of course, what your experience has been locally where you are right now in Georgia. And I'm also wondering at the same time that you still have family in Bulgaria.
I do.
It strikes me that we all get fed news in certain ways, depending on which outlet we're looking at. So yeah, really interested to hear your experience of what's going on in your part of the US, but also what you're hearing from people you actually know, family in Bulgaria.
Yeah. So let me start with my firsthand experience here. And it's, I would say it's a very interesting one. We're obviously in quarantine. The quarantine here doesn't feel like it's quite as impactful as it may be some other places. Obviously, a lot of places are closed and restaurants and bars are only offering takeout. There's also the concept of social distancing, which feels a little vague. I don't know that anybody's really following it consistently from what I'm seeing here. The one change that's been very interesting living in the US is that I see people walking so much more now out and about because it's the only activity for them to do. So the area that I live in has a lot of walking trails where over the last decade I would see 1 to 2 people when I was out, and now it's flooded with people. So it's a little interesting to just see that change and see how people are shifting and adjusting based on the fact that they have nothing else to do.
A healthy benefit at least.
Yeah, I think to an extent. But what strikes me is when I talk to people back home is that the measures there are a lot stricter. And the way that it's enforced seems to be a lot stricter, which part of that I think is cultural. Part of that is just how spaced out and large things are in the US. I think it would be a lot more difficult to enforce a strict quarantine. There's also the reluctance from people to follow it to an extent. because it impedes on what people perceive as their personal freedoms. So it's very interesting just to see the dichotomy between how people are both implementing restrictions at a government level and how people are actually following through and adhering to them. I'm not sure if you've read, but the governor of the state reopened some public beaches in the last week, even though there's a statewide quarantine. So it's interesting. It's very difficult to get a sense for how strict things are and how strict they ought to be based on the different approaches across the world.
And personally, you kind of sticking inside and quarantining hard, or?
Yeah, we're trying to do our best to stay inside. We'll only go to the grocery store and obviously outdoors for exercise, just to get some fresh air. But besides that, we're occasionally meeting with friends at an outdoor space where we just form a big circle and everybody stays a few feet apart. And we have some drinks and just talk and just try to take in the surreal atmosphere that we live in.
Yeah. Shopping is like a weird zombie post-apocalyptic experience here as well. So your business is around internet security, and
That's right.
This is particularly interesting now because the whole world has suddenly discovered Zoom and Skype and all of that stuff. What's been your professional take on that part of things?
So I think that obviously with the move to technology and mobility into the cloud, there are going to be issues exposed in a lot of services and a lot of programs and applications, especially in a time like this where applications like Zoom are being utilized so much more. There's going to be a lot more scrutiny and there's going to be a lot more eyes. And they're also going to come in the crosshairs of attackers. So I'm seeing, just personally in my business email, I'm seeing all kinds of nefarious messages coming through that are clearly intended to try to compromise my environment. It's to me, it's an interesting, the motivation for people is always very hard to pin down. But during these times, to see people go after the masses, it's a little disheartening, not surprising. So overall, it's an interesting time. Businesses definitely, like most other businesses, I think, experiencing some bumps just due to the unprecedented slowdown in everything outside of a few sectors like hospitals, and seems like construction is still going pretty strong. Obviously, grocery and farming, the food supply chain is still going pretty strong. Transportation, in terms of getting things from place A to B. But besides that, it seems like everything else is coming to a pretty abrupt stop.
Yeah, right. Have your clients also experienced the nefarious inbox activities, and have you been supporting them in that way, or is this something that you think is just starting to happen and you're going to see requests and contacts come through once people have worked out how to unfold their home desk?
So I haven't necessarily talked to my clients about that. A lot of them are really just trying to assess the situation in a broader aspect. For me, I have a small business, so my coordination in terms of continuity are pretty simple. Some of the clients that I work with are rather large and in industries that are deeply affected by this. So for them, it's much more of a crisis sort of situation where, revenue has dried up almost overnight at a rate that's unprecedented. If you look at the unemployment numbers and how companies are taking strategies to either reduce their workforce or furlough their workforce, it's going to have a pretty significant impact, I think, both to the companies themselves when things get back to normal, whatever that may look like. And then also, I mean, just from the overall broader economy, I think the pain is really a few months out that we're going to see across the board.
Yeah, no question. And from speaking with people across different countries and even different states, I'm seeing different reactions from different governors, and obviously Trump at the top, and then different countries with different prime ministers and what have you. So we'll see when we get to the other side. Tell me, sort of from your standpoint, you're experiencing the bumps that many of us are experiencing. What have been your thoughts around and actions around how you're helping your clients right now in a way that you weren't needing to, or didn't feel like there was a need before this?
I think a lot of the actions that I'm taking now are really just being patient and just talking to my clients and almost providing an outlet for them to an extent. I'm using this time to look at some additional avenues for business that I wasn't looking at before, and strategizing with consultants in other areas to develop some service offerings that cross-feed each other that will benefit, I think, everybody in the long run. I'm also using this time to just understand some technology aspects in a little bit more depth, so that I can then bring that value back to my clients when they're ready to make investments. But for the most part, I would say it's just being flexible and trying to be understanding of their position, because it's very stressful for some people. I would say for a lot of people, and for the time being, it's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, right. And outside of your immediate situation, outside of your immediate business situation, and even outside of the US, taking into consideration that you have a decent perspective on what's happening in Bulgaria and maybe more of a broader, wide view than the average person that lives in the US. How do you think we're going to get through this, and what do you think it's going to look like on the other side?
Well, we'll get through this. I'm optimistic. I know what I've been saying so far doesn't sound very optimistic, but I'm obviously an optimist just by nature. And I've seen a lot of situations throughout my life. I was a kid when the collapse of the Soviet Union and then the Eastern Bloc in the late 80s and early 90s, and there was massive scarcity. Where you couldn't find anything in the stores when I was in Bulgaria. So that was a very interesting experience early on. Obviously 9/11 happened when I was here and in college. There was the economic crisis associated with the mortgage industry in the late 2000s. So we'll get through this. Everybody's going to feel the pain. But I think what's going to help us get through this is just being human, being there for each other, and trying to be helpful. We're reorganized, right? There's going to be all kinds of businesses and ideas that pop up out of this that nobody was considering before, or didn't seem for some of those ideas to be implemented. It wasn't practical. So we'll see a lot of innovation. When a lot of smart people become idle, it's difficult for a while, but there's always a creativity boom that's associated with that. I think governments are going to have to play their role as much as they can, which is a little concerning given how much depth there is in the world. Adding a lot more to that is going to strain a lot of economies. But all in all, it may take a little bit of time, but I think we'll rebound and we'll come back stronger, and we'll have new business ventures and new products and services that we didn't even imagine were possible.
I completely agree with that. Has there been anything that you've seen the beginnings of, either locally or online, that you think, oh, that's a cool way of embracing this shitstorm? Or have you, because I'm hearing kind of from people about things as simple as the generosity of humanity in local communities, all the way through to there's an app, there's this new app and it's going to change everything, in a way that, Uber suddenly showed up, and all of those things. Are you seeing anything at the moment?
I'm seeing a lot of just good intent in people. See a lot of people that are working hard and trying to provide essential services. I'm seeing a lot of people that are being very resilient and just being role models for everyone. As far as products and services, there hasn't necessarily been anything that has caught my eye quite yet that I think will be sustained. There's obviously a lot of necessary services popping up right now. Like a lot of the face masks that are being produced by a variety of different companies. That's obviously serving a need. I'm hopeful that that's not going to be a sustained service where we'll have to wear masks for the next decade whenever we interact with people. So
I think the kids with 3D printers are doing some great things all across the world. That's cool, man. So I'm interested to know finally how you're personally going to get through. You've got a positive outlook. You've got a business. You're going to have to #pivot to a certain degree with the learning stuff. Is there anything specific that you're turning to learn, or the self-development bit of who you are? Is it technical stuff, or is it like stoicism?
Well, I'm definitely trying to shore up my skill sets and read through and make sure that any areas that I've maybe let slide a little bit, I'm refreshing my technical skill sets. But really, just from a personal experience, is really just being present for this. It may not be pleasant. It may not be what anybody wants, but it is part of our experience. And I think it's important to be there, and it's important to be fully present for it, because that is the only way that you can really learn and over time just be able to adapt without this being some sort of scarring experience. So I'm trying to practice a lot of mindfulness and awareness, and just looking at things with a clear set of eyes for what it is versus what I hope it to be, or what I want it to be, or what I wish it would be.
Yeah, it feels like you have a kind of pretty calm position just because of what you've seen in the past, especially the collapse of the Eastern Bloc thing. That must have been like, that's no surprise to you. This is a new experience for me, trying to get toilet paper, right? So that puts you in a strong position from a mindset point of view. I have one other question, because I just want to get your take on the internet security side of things as an expert, really. If you've got loads of stuff happening online with, this is not safe, House Party isn't safe, Zoom wasn't safe, now it is again. What are your top tips and recommendations for people to remain safe online? And especially, I'm interested because I'm giving like my 6-year-old a little bit more access to my iPad, for example, that I might not have done. And while I'm monitoring it and all of that stuff, I'm just interested in, is there anything we should look for? Is there anything we should be aware of to think, okay, that looks scammy? I like to think I'm pretty on it, but equally, I'm sure there's a ton of things I miss. So is there anything we can be doing to protect ourselves from the shade of the people who are the desperate opportunists, let's call them that?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a personal standpoint, just always be cognizant when looking at messages, whether those are coming in via email, via text message, social media, anything that requires you to access a link, put in any sort of credentials. You always need to be cognizant of where it's coming from, even if it appears that it's coming from somebody that you know. If all of a sudden your aunt is sending you a document about how to heal yourself from COVID-19, right? It's good to look at that with a skeptical eye. Any sort of offers that appear online with websites that you're not familiar with, I would be very careful in rushing to purchase, to your point, toilet paper. It's an interesting time that we live in when that becomes a scarce item, and people are just quick to capitalize on it. So just taking a pause, right? Before we, download software, purchase software, open a link, just having that pause and actually thinking whether we know what we're doing, because otherwise it could compromise both our security and our privacy, which during this time is also something very important to think about with all the technology that's around. We need to be cognizant of the information that is being shared for the greater good and what the long-term impacts of that could be, because a lot of times situations like this will cause a shift in perspective when it comes to our personal privacy, and reversing those effects and the way that information is shared is a lot more difficult to do after the fact once it's out there in the open.
Right. Yeah, that's super useful. FireBrand Security, obviously, which seems to be the word I'm using a lot at the moment, obviously, as my link word. So I'm trying not to do it too much, but it's just falling out all the time. That you're all about helping people protect their IP, their assets, their lists, their data. Could you tell us maybe a little bit more about that, and also where people can find you and the kinds of problems that you're solving for people and results you're getting for people around that, making sure that they're watertight and safe and everything they're doing online is good?
Sure. So my company focuses on helping businesses implement information security programs. So when it comes to that space, there is a multitude of different things that companies need to do, ranging from a handful of things that are very basic in nature, like protecting your email security, making sure that your access to your systems is secure, making sure that your items are patched. And when it comes to a larger company, there's a lot more complexity and intricacies in how those processes are actually deployed. So what I help companies do is build out those capabilities and help them implement a way to measure the effectiveness of those capabilities. I think that's a lacking area in the space, to where companies are routinely being breached, as we see in the news. And a lot of the challenges that are associated with that are very deep rooted within how companies do business. So security is definitely lagging. It's an area that's changing, but it's changing slowly. And there's a heavy amount of investment that it's required by a lot of companies. So I help them kind of look through all the complexities and help them come up with an actionable strategy of how to go about implementing the process technology in a way to measure what they do. So the best way to contact me is either through my website, which is FireBrandSecurity.com. Email is info@FireBrandSecurity.com.
That's perfect. Thanks, man. I think after this initial wave, my prediction is you're going to see a boom in business, because what I'm seeing, I think what everyone's agreeing on so far that I'm speaking with, is that a lot of people are going to be doing even more online because they've realized how easy it is, which means that there's going to be more security issues to fix. So I really hope that, and I'm sure your business will continue to boom and boom as a result of this crisis. So, thanks so much for sharing that advice, and always interested in a story from a man who's from one place and living in another. Like that's always a fascinating story, and thanks for sharing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
Awesome, man. I will speak to you soon.
Sounds good.
Cheers, man.
This episode of CrisisCast 2020 was produced by me in London and Kate Astrakhan in Michigan, with artwork by Ryan Field and sound design by Lee Turner. CrisisCast 2020 is a production from Podcast Network Solutions, a full-service podcast production company who are ready to help you plan, record, produce, and promote your message with podcasting. To find out more and grab your copy of Podstar if you're feeling pod curious, visit us at podcastnetworksolutions.com.